The community hall smelled of polished wood and cheap wine, the kind that clung to the back of your throat. I stood near the wall, my fingers laced so tightly I could feel my pulse in my knuckles. My name is Olivia Smith, and that night at the Willow Creek Veterans Gala, they hadn't bothered to save me a chair. I was 47, and for 10 years I'd come to this event slipping into the same navy dress that hugged my frame a little closer each season. Every year I lingered at the edges, watching the room glow with pride and laughter. My sister Claire once called me a coward, her words slicing through a family dinner like a knife. Olivia. You've never fought for anything, she'd said, her eyes glinting with judgment. I didn't argue. I never did. Fairy lights draped the ceiling, casting a warm haze over the crowd, but their softness didn't touch the glances that skipped over me. My family, Claire, her husband Tom, their 2 daughters sat near the stage, their table marked with red sashes, a sign of honor. Tom was a Gulf War veteran, a mechanic who'd served with steady hands, and they carried his story like a badge. I didn't envy him, but I felt their dismissal the way their eyes slid past me when I entered, as if I were a shadow cast by someone else's light. Olivia's here, Claire had murmured to her daughters, her voice light but sharp like a needle hidden in silk. Her youngest, Maddie, smirked. Aunt Liv, why'd you even come? This is for people who did something. I gave a small smile, the kind I'd perfected over years. It was easier than speaking, easier than letting the ache in my chest spill out. I drifted to the back where a table held stacks of programs, their edges curling from neglect. I picked one up, the paper, cool and smooth, my name absent from the list of honorees. I hadn't expected it to be there. I'd learned to expect nothing, to let the world paint me as it pleased. But that night, something stirred deep inside me, a quiet tremor. Not quite anger, but heavier, like a memory I'd buried long ago. The gala pulsed with life. The mayor took the podium, his voice thundering through the speakers, praising the veterans, their families, the sacrifices that bound them. The crowd clapped when Tom's name echoed, and Claire's face lit up, her hand resting on his arm. I clapped too, my hands barely meeting because I meant it. I knew sacrifice knew it in a way that made my bones ache, but no one in that room knew that. They couldn't. What I'd done, where I'd been, it was sealed behind promises I'd made when my hands were steadier, when my heart didn't falter at the sound of my own name. I was 22 when I joined the Air Force, not with boots on the ground, but with eyes on a screen. They didn't advertise my role, didn't print it on posters or boast about it in speeches. I had a gift for patterns, for seeing what others missed, for holding my nerve when the world hung on a single choice. They made me a drone operations commander, one of the first women to sit in that chair, back when the program was a secret whispered in locked rooms. I worked in bunkers, my voice steady as I guided strikes across oceans, my pulse hammering as I watched the fallout. I saved lives. I ended them. Each moment etched itself into me, locked in a vault I couldn't open, not even for myself. In Willow Creek, though, I was just Olivia, plain Olivia, the spinster who never married, never had children, never amounted to anything worth a second glance. She's just there, Maddie had said to her sister once, her voice carrying across a Christmas dinner, and I didn't correct her. How could I? Could I tell them I'd lived in a world of shadows where every decision carried a weight they'd never fathom, that I'd left it behind because it was breaking me, that some nights I still woke reaching for controls that weren't there, my ears filled with a hum that had long since faded. The mayor's speech ended and applause filled the room, loud and warm. I stayed still, my gaze on the scuffed linoleum, its scratches mapping years of nights like this. I could have left. My coat hung over a chair in the corner, its wool soft and familiar, promising the quiet of my house on the town's edge, where the only sounds were the refrigerator's drone and the distant bark of a dog. I wanted to go, to slip away unnoticed, but something rooted me there. It was the same stubborn hope that always kept me coming back, the faint belief that one day someone might look at me and see. Then Claire stood her glass, raised her voice, cutting through the chatter like a bell. To the true heroes, she said, her eyes locked on Tom, her smile radiant. To those who fought, who didn't just stand by. The room roared, glasses, clinking, voices rising. Her words hit me like a slap, though she didn't glance my way. She didn't need to. I knew their meaning, had heard them in different forms, different places. Coward? Empty? Nothing. I didn't move. My face stayed calm. My hands still clasped, because that's what I'd learned. You don't survive my kind of work by crumbling. You survive by standing firm, by letting the world think it's won. But inside, I was coming apart, the threads of my silence, fraying the weight in my chest, pressing harder. I wanted to shout, to tell them everything, to let the truth flood out like rain on parched ground. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I studied the program in my hands, the names of the honored blurring as my eyes burned. I blinked, and no tears fell. They never did. I'd taught myself that too. I folded the paper once, then twice, and tucked it into my pocket. It was a small thing, a quiet thing, but it was mine. In that moment, it was enough. I'm sharing this with you because I want you to understand what it's like to carry a truth no one sees, to stand in a room full of people who think they've measured you when they've barely scratched the surface. If you're listening, if you've ever felt erased, I need you to hear me. This story isn't just mine, it's yours too. So please hit that subscribe button, join me on this channel because there's more to tell, more to show you about what happens when the truth finally breaks free. The gala carried on. The band struck up an old patriotic song, and the crowd swayed their faces bright with pride. I stayed in the back, my coat still waiting, my heart still heavy. I didn't know then that the night wasn't over. I didn't know someone was coming, someone who'd turn everything upside down. But I felt it, a faint spark in my chest, like a signal I'd been trained to catch. Something was on its way. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. The band's music drifted through the hall, a slow, patriotic melody that made the air feel heavier. I leaned against the wall, the folded program still in my pocket, its edges pressing into my thigh. The gala carried on, all smiles and clinking glasses, but I was somewhere else. My name is Olivia Smith, and at 47, I've learned how to slip out of a room without leaving it. My eyes were on the crowd, but my mind was years away in places I hadn't let myself revisit for a long time. Places where the air smelled of stale coffee and ozone, where the hum of machines was louder than any human voice. I was 22 when they found me. Not in a recruitment office, not with a poster and a promise of glory, but in a college lecture hall where I'd been doodling equations in the margins of my notes. I'd always been good with numbers, patterns, probabilities, the kind of logic that felt like breathing. A man in a plain suit waited for me after class, his handshake firm, his eyes too sharp for a civilian. "You're quick," he said, not smiling. "We need quick." That was the beginning. A week later, I was on a plane to a base I can't name, signing papers I wasn't allowed to read twice. The training was nothing like the movies. No obstacle courses, no shouting sergeants, just rooms with no windows, screens glowing green and gray, and voices in my headset that never gave their names. They taught me to fly drones, not the toy kind, but machines that could level buildings, machines that saw everything. I learned to read satellite feeds like a book, to spot a threat in a flicker of shadow, to make calls that left no room for doubt. Target confirmed, I'd say my voice steady, even when my hands shook. I was one of the first women they trusted with it, back when the program was a secret even to most of the military. They called us ghosts. Nobody knew we existed, not even the pilots whose strikes we guided. I remember the first mission. A bunker in Nevada, the air so dry it crackled. I sat at a console, my screen showing a village half a world away, mud huts and dust trails under a sky too blue for what was coming. My target was a man, just a grainy figure in a thermal scan, but the intel was clear. He was planning something that would cost lives. My job was to stop him. I called the strike, my voice flat, my eyes locked on the screen. A flash, a bloom of white, and he was gone. So were the two men standing beside him. I didn't know their names. I didn't know if they deserved it. But I carried them with me, their shapes burned into my memory, joining the others that would follow. Back in the hall, a laugh broke through my thoughts, Claire's sharp and bright as she leaned toward Tom, her hand on his arm. I blinked the glow of fairy lights pulling me back to Willow Creek. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath. I shifted my weight, the linoleum cool under my shoes, and let my gaze drift to the ceiling. I didn't belong here, not really. But I didn't belong there anymore either, in those bunkers in that life. I'd walked away 10 years ago after one too many nights waking up with my heart pounding my hands, reaching for a joystick that wasn't there. I told them I was done, and they let me go, but not without a price. Silence. That was the deal. I could leave, but I could never speak of it. Not to my family, not to anyone. Not to... Sometimes I forgot I was ever anything but this. Olivia, the quiet one, the spinster who lived in a small house with creaking floors and a garden that never quite bloomed. I'd catch myself in the mirror, my hair streaked with gray, my eyes tired, and wonder where she went. The woman who'd stared down generals who'd made decisions that changed the world in ways no one would ever know. She was still in me somewhere, but she was buried deep under layers of silence and small-town days. I glanced at my family's table. Maddie was whispering to her sister, their heads closed, their laughter soft but cutting. I knew what they thought of me. I'd heard it in bits and pieces over the years, useless, boring, a burden. Claire was worse. She'd always been the loud one, the one who filled rooms with her voice, her stories, her pride in Tom's service. I didn't resent her for it, not exactly, but I felt the weight of her judgment the way she'd look at me and see nothing. "You could have done something with your life, Liv," she'd said once years ago, her tone half pity, half scorn. I'd knotted my lips pressed tight, because what could I say? That I'd done things she'd never dream of. That I'd carried secrets heavier than her husband's medals. The band shifted to a slower tune, and the crowd swayed their faces soft in the dim light. I stayed still, my hands clasped again the program in my pocket, a small, sharp reminder of my place here. I could have left. My coat was still there, folded over the chair, its weight familiar, promising the quiet of my house, the safety of being unseen. But I didn't move. Something held me, the same stubborn thread that had kept me coming back to this gala year after year, despite the stares, the whispers, the emptiness. I thought of another night years ago in a different kind of room, a control center, the air thick with tension screens, flickering with feeds from a war zone. I was 30 then, my headset tight against my ears, my voice the only calm thing in the chaos. A strike team was pinned down their radio, crackling with panic. "We're taking fire," the team lead shouted, his voice breaking. "We need support now." I didn't hesitate. I called in a drone, my fingers flying over the controls, my eyes scanning the feed for the enemy's position. I saw them 3 figures moving fast, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. I made the call. The strike was clean. The team survived, and later their commander sent a message. "Whoever you are, you saved us. I never met them. I never would. But I kept that message tucked away in a box with other things I couldn't show anyone." In the hall, the mayor was back at the podium introducing the next speaker, a local veteran, with a story everyone already knew. The crowd leaned in their faces, eager, while I stayed in the back, my heart still racing from the memory. I didn't talk about those days, not even to myself. They were too big, too heavy, and Willow Creek was too small to hold them. But they lived in me, in the way my hands still twitched when I heard a certain kind of static, in the way I could still read a room like a battlefield, spotting threats in the tilt of a head, the edge of a smile. I looked at Claire again, her face glowing as she clapped for the speaker. She didn't know. None of them did. And maybe that was the hardest part, not the silence, but the loneliness of it. I'd carried this alone for so long it had become part of me, like the ache in my knees or the gray in my hair. Sometimes I wondered if I'd made the right choice, leaving that life, coming back here to be nothing. But then I'd remember the weight of it, the way each mission added another stone to my chest, and I'd know I couldn't have stayed. The speaker finished, and the room clapped again, the sound washing over me like a wave. I let it pass my eyes on the floor, my hands still clasped. I wasn't ready to leave, not yet. There was something in the air tonight, a faint hum, like the buzz of a drone before it takes flight. I'd felt it before in those bunkers when a mission was about to change everything. I didn't know what it meant, not yet, but I knew enough to listen. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what it's like to live with a past no one knows, to walk through a world that sees you as small when you've carried things that could break it apart. If you're out there, if you've ever hidden who you are, I need you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, join me on this channel because this story isn't over. There's more to come, more to show you about what happens when the shadows step into the light. The gala moved forward, the band playing on the crowd, lost in their pride and their stories. I stayed in the back, my coat untouched, my heart still heavy but awake. I didn't know what was coming, but I felt it, that spark in my chest growing stronger. Something was on its way, and I was ready. The morning after the gala, I woke to the sound of rain tapping my bedroom window, soft and steady like a pulse. My name is Olivia Smith, and at 47, I've learned to love the quiet of my house on the edge of Willow Creek. It's a small place with walls that creak in the wind and a kitchen table scarred from years of solitary meals. I lay there for a moment, the ache in my chest still lingering from the night before, Claire's words echoing in my head. To those who fought, who didn't just stand by. I closed my eyes, letting the rain drown her out, but the hurt stayed heavy as ever. I got up, my bare feet cold against the hardwood, and moved through my morning like I always did. Coffee black brewed in a pot older than Maddie. Toast no butter because I'd forgotten to buy any. The radio hummed in the background, some local station playing ads for tractor parts and church suppers. I didn't listen, not really. My mind was still in the gala hall, replaying the way Maddie's smirk had cut deeper than Claire's toast, the way the crowd's applause had felt like a door slamming shut. I set my mug down harder than I meant to, and the coffee sloshed, a dark ring spreading on the table. I didn't wipe it up. Some messes you just let sit. Outside, the rain kept falling, turning the street into a blur of gray. I pulled on my coat, a different one, not the one from last night still draped over the chair at the hall, and headed to the market. Willow Creek isn't big, just a few streets lined with shops that haven't changed since I was a girl. The market was crowded. Despite the weather, people huddled under awnings, their voices loud with gossip and complaints. I kept my head down my basket, heavy with apples and a loaf of bread, moving through the aisles like a ghost. That's what I was to them most days. Olivia, the one who's just there. "Morning, Liv," said Mrs. Carter, the cashier, her smile polite but quick. She was kind enough, but I saw the pity in her eyes, the same pity I'd seen for years. Spinster, they called me, though not always to my face. Burden. Nobody. I'd heard it all in whispers at church, in the way people's voices dropped when I walked by. I nodded, paid for my groceries, and stepped back into the rain, the plastic bags cutting into my palms. I didn't mind the sting. It was something to feel something real. Back home, I unpacked the groceries, my hands moving by rote, my thoughts drifting to the years I'd spent here invisible. I'd come back to Willow Creek 10 years ago after I left the Air Force, thinking I could start over. I'd imagined a life where I didn't wake up tasting adrenaline, where my dreams weren't filled with grainy feeds and static. But starting over meant becoming someone else, someone small, someone who didn't carry the weight of 1,000 unseen battles. I'd done it, or tried to. I worked part-time at the library shelving books, helping kids with their homework. I went to church, though I sat in the back. I smiled when people spoke to me, even when their words were sharp, and I never, ever talked about before. But the town talked. They had their stories about me, each one flatter than the last. Olivia's always been odd, they'd say, as if my quiet was a flaw. Never married, never left. What's she even do? Claire was the loudest, her voice carrying the weight of family authority. My sister's just stuck. She'd told a neighbor once, not knowing I was in earshot. She had chances, but she never took them. I'd stood there, my hands full of grocery bags then too, and said nothing. What could I say? That my chances had been in bunkers, in rooms with no light-making calls that saved lives and ended them. That I'd walked away because I couldn't carry the guilt anymore. I thought of Maddie, her giggle at the gala, her words slicing through the air. This is for heroes. She was 20, bright and bold with her mother's confidence and none of her restraint. She'd been a baby when I was still in the service. When I'd come home for brief visits, my eyes hollow from lack of sleep. I'd held her once, her small hands grabbing at my uniform, and I'd wondered what it would be like to have a child, a family, a life that wasn't classified. But I'd gone back to the bunkers, back to the screens, and when I finally left for good, Maddie was old enough to see me as nothing. To her, I was Aunt Liv, the one who didn't matter. I sat at my kitchen table, the coffee cold now, and traced the scars on the wood with my finger. I'd always been kind to them, to Maddie, to Claire, to all of them. I brought pies to their barbecues, sent cards on birthdays, listened when they talked about Tom's medals or Maddie's college plans. I didn't ask for anything back. But kindness doesn't erase pity, and it doesn't stop scorn. At the library, I'd overheard a coworker, once her voice low but clear Olivia's sweet, but she's got no backbone, never stands up for herself. I'd kept shelving books, my hands steady, my face blank. They didn't know what it took to stand up, not the way I did not, in rooms where one wrong call could cost everything. I thought of a moment years ago in a control room halfway across the world. I was 28, my headset tight, my screen showing a convoy under attack. The radio was chaos soldiers shouting static, crackling, a young lieutenant begging for help. "We're losing men," he'd said, his voice raw. I'd found the target, a sniper nest hidden in a hillside, and called the strike. The drone was precise, the threat gone in a flash of light, but I stayed on the line talking the lieutenant through the withdrawal, my voice calm, even as my heart pounded. "You're clear," I'd told him, and he'd whispered, "Thank you." I never knew his name. I never would. But I carried him too in that box of memories I couldn't open. In Willow Creek, no one saw that Olivia. They saw the woman who walked home in the rain, who shelved books, who stood in the back at galas. They saw the spinster, the nobody, the one who didn't fight. And I let them. It was easier that way, safer. The oaths I'd sworn didn't end when I left the service. Silence was my duty, my burden, my cage. But some days like today, it felt heavier than others. Some days I wanted to break it, to stand in the middle of the market and tell them everything who I'd been, what I'd done, what I still carried. But I didn't. I never would. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew they wouldn't understand. The rain slowed the world outside my window, softening into mist. I got up, washed my mug, and dried my hands on a faded towel. There was a church supper tonight, one I'd promised to attend, though I didn't want to. Claire would be there, probably Tom too, maybe Maddie. They'd sit at the center table, their voices loud, their stories polished. I'd sit in the back, as always, my plate half empty, my smile fixed. I'd listen to their boasts, their laughter, and I'd say nothing. But I'd go. I always did. Not for them, but for me, because showing up was its own kind of strength, even if no one saw it. I thought of another memory, fleeting but sharp. A medal, small and silver, handed to me in a closed room by a colonel who didn't smile. For service beyond the call, he'd set his voice low. I'd taken it, my hand steady, and never shown it to anyone. It was in my house now, hidden in a drawer with old letters and a photograph of me at 22. My eyes bright, my uniform crisp. I hadn't looked at it in years. I didn't need to. I felt it every day in the way I carried myself, in the way I kept going, even when the world called me nothing. I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like to be unseen, to carry a strength no one recognizes, to endure not because you want to, but because you have to. If you're out there, if you've ever felt like you're fading, I need you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, join me on this channel because this isn't the end. There's more to come, more to show you about what happens when the world finally sees. The day moved on the rain, stopping the sky turning pale. I pulled on my coat again, ready for the supper, ready for the stairs and the silence. I didn't know what was waiting, but I felt it, that hum in my chest, growing louder. Something was coming, and I was still here, still standing. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine as I walked toward the church. My name is Olivia Smith, and at 47 I'd learned to move through Willow Creek like a shadow, unnoticed but present. The church supper was tonight a tradition as old as the town itself, where families gathered to share casseroles and stories under the glow of fluorescent lights. I hadn't wanted to come. My house, with its creaking floors and quiet corners, had called to me all afternoon, promising safety, solitude. But I'd promised Mrs. Carter I'd bring my pecan pie, and promises even small ones were things I kept. My shoes crunched on the gravel path leading to the church, the white steeple looming against a sky bruised with dusk. I carried the pie in a tin, its weight steadying my hands, though my heart felt anything but steady. The Gala from a few nights ago still clung to me, Claire's raised glass, Maddie's smirk, the way the room had cheered for heroes, while I stood in the back invisible. I told myself I was used to it, that their words didn't cut anymore, but they did. Each one was a small stone piling up in my chest, and tonight I wasn't sure I had room for more. The church hall was already full when I arrived, the hum of voices spilling out through the open doors. I hesitated at the threshold, my breath catching, as I saw the crowd, familiar faces, all turned away, caught in their own circles of laughter and pride. I smoothed my dress, a simple gray one I'd worn to too many events like this, and stepped inside. The air was warm, thick with the smells of baked beans, cornbread, and perfume. I made my way to the food table, setting my pie down among the other dishes, its crust golden but unremarkable in the spread. No one noticed. I didn't expect them to. I found a seat at a table near the back, half hidden by a pillar, my hands folded in my lap. The chair was hard, its wood worn smooth by years of suppers, and I sat straight, my posture, a habit from another life. Across the room I saw Claire. Her hair swept up her dress, a bright shade of blue that drew eyes. She was at the center table, of course, with Tom beside her, his laugh loud and easy. Maddie and her sister Lauren were there too, their faces lit with the confidence of youth. They hadn't seen me come in, or if they had, they didn't care. I was used to that too. The supper began with a prayer, the pastor's voice booming over the chatter, asking for blessings on the food, the town, the veterans who'd served. I bowed my head, my eyes on the tablecloth, its faded flowers, a map of stains and memories. When the prayer ended, the room came alive again, plates, clinking voices, rising. I stayed where I was, my hands still folded, watching as people filled their plates and returned to their seats, their stories growing louder with each bite. I should have gotten up, should have joined the line for food, but I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't hungry, not for food or for the small talk that came with it. Instead, I watched my eyes catching details the way they'd been trained, to Claire's tight smile when someone mentioned Tom's latest award, Maddie's quick glance at her phone, the way Lauren leaned in to whisper something that made them both laugh. I wondered what they were saying, though I could guess. I'd heard their whispers before their words, sharp and careless, slicing through the air like shrapnel. "Olivia, you're here," a voice said, pulling me back. It was Mrs. Carter, her apron smudged with flour, her smile kind but fleeting. "Your pie looks lovely. You should eat something." I nodded, murmuring a thank you, but she was already moving on her attention, caught by someone else. I didn't mind. Kindness, even the quick kind, was rare, and I took it where I could. I stood smoothing my dress again and made my way to the food table. The line was long, the crowd jostling, and I kept my eyes down, my hands clasped in front of me. I felt the weight of their glances, or maybe it was just my imagination, the way people seemed to step aside, not out of courtesy, but because I was in the way. I filled my plate with small portions, a scoop of beans, a slice of cornbread, and returned to my seat, the pillar shielding me from the room's bright center. That's when I heard her. Claire, her voice carrying over the din, sharp and clear. "Tom's getting another commendation next month," she said, her tone proud, almost defiant. "They're saying it's for his work in the Gulf, but really it's for everything he's done since. Not everyone can keep serving, you know. Some people just fade away." The table laughed a soft ripple of agreement, and I felt it. The sting of her words aimed like an arrow, though she hadn't looked my way. I knew what she meant. I'd heard it before in different forms, different rooms. Useless. Nothing. The one who faded. I set my fork down, my appetite gone. My hands were steady, but inside I was unraveling the stones in my chest, shifting, pressing harder. I wanted to stand, to walk to her table and tell her everything, who I'd been, what I'd done, the lives I'd saved, and the ones I'd lost. I wanted to tell her about the nights I'd spent in bunkers, my voice the only thing keeping soldiers alive, my decisions, carrying a weight she'd never understand. But I didn't. I couldn't. The oaths I'd sworn were chains, and silence was my duty even now, years after I'd left that life. Instead, I sat there, my eyes on my plate, the cornbread crumbling under my fork. I thought of a moment years ago in a control room lit only by screens. I was 29, my headset heavy, my fingers steady on the controls. A strike team was trapped, their radio crackling with fear. "We're done if you don't get us out," their leader had said, his voice tight. I'd found the target, a truck rigged with explosives moving fast toward their position. I called the strike, my voice calm, my heart racing as the drone's feed showed the explosion. The threat gone. The team made it out. Later, their commander sent a note, "You're a goddamn miracle." I'd kept that note hidden in a drawer with a medal I'd never shown anyone. But here in this church hall, it felt like a dream, something that belonged to someone else. The supper went on, the room growing louder, the air thick with pride and nostalgia. I stayed in my seat. My plate barely touched my hands, folded again. I could have left. My coat was hung on a rack by the door, its familiar weight waiting to carry me back to my quiet house. I wanted to go to slip away before Claire's next barb, before Maddie's next giggle. But I didn't. Something held me there, the same stubborn thread that had brought me to the gala, to this supper, to every moment I'd endured in Willow Creek. It wasn't hope, not exactly. It was something harder, something forged in those bunkers in the years of carrying what no one saw. I thought of another memory, brief but vivid. A general, his uniform stiff with medals, shaking my hand in a closed room. "You're one of the best we've got, Smith," he'd said, his voice low, his eyes serious. I'd nodded, my face blank, because that's what you did when the world depended on your silence. I'd been 32 then, at the height of my career, before the weight of it started to break me. I'd left soon after, but I carried his words with me, tucked away with the medal, the note, the memories I couldn't share. The pastor stood calling for attention, his voice cutting through the chatter. He announced a special guest, someone important, though I didn't catch the name. The room hushed, heads turning toward the door. I stayed where I was, my eyes on the tablecloth, my heart beating a little faster. I didn't know why. It was just a feeling, a hum in my chest, like the buzz of a drone before a mission. I'd felt it before in those moments when everything was about to change. I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like to stand in a room where no one sees you, to carry a truth that burns inside. If you've ever felt like you're nothing like your story, doesn't matter. I need you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, join me on this channel because this isn't the end. There's more to come, more to show you about what happens when the light finally finds you. The door opened and the room went quiet, all eyes turning. I stayed still, my hands clasped my heart, loud in my ears. Something was coming, and I was ready, even if I didn't know what it was. The church hall fell silent, a stillness so deep it felt like the world had paused. My name is Olivia Smith, and at 47, I'd grown used to being unseen, a shadow in rooms like this. But that night at the church supper, something shifted. The door at the far end of the hall had opened, and every head turned, every voice dropped, as if the air itself had tightened. I sat at my table near the back, my hands still clasped, my half-eaten plate of cornbread and beans forgotten. I didn't look up, not at first. I didn't need to. I felt it, that hum in my chest, the one I'd known in bunkers in moments when everything was about to change. The pastor's voice broke the quiet, warm, but hesitant, as if he wasn't sure of his own words. "Folks, we have a special guest tonight," he said, his hands clasped at the podium. "General Raymond Holt, United States Air Force, retired. He's asked to say a few words." A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads craning, chairs creaking as people leaned forward. I stayed still, my eyes on the tablecloth, its faded flowers blurring under my gaze. I knew the name, though I hadn't heard it in years. Holt. A name tied to classified briefings, to rooms where decisions carried the weight of lives. I didn't let myself think about it. Not yet. Footsteps echoed, measured and firm, the kind that belonged to someone who'd walked through war zones and command centers. I heard the rustle of fabric, the faint clink of metals, and then a voice, low, steady, commanding without effort. "Good evening," General Holt said, and the room seemed to lean toward him, drawn by the gravity of his presence. "I'm not here to take up your time. I'm here for someone specific." The words hung in the air, heavy, deliberate. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, but I kept my head down, my fingers tightening around each other. It couldn't be me. It wasn't possible. I risked a glance, just a flicker of my eyes. He stood at the front, tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform, crisp despite his retirement, the silver in his hair catching the fluorescent light. His face was weathered-lined with years of command, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room with a purpose I recognized. I'd seen that look before in control rooms when a mission was locked in, when there was no room for error. My heart beat faster, a rhythm I hadn't felt in a decade, but I forced it down, forced my face to stay calm. I was Olivia Smith, the spinster, the nobody. No one came for me. The crowd was whispering now, heads turning, trying to guess who he meant. Claire's voice cut through, soft but clear, from her table at the center. "Must be for Tom," she said, her tone proud, her hand on her husband's arm. Tom shifted his face, flushing, but he sat straighter, ready to stand. Maddie and Lauren exchanged glances, their smiles eager, certain. The room seemed to agree, a low hum of expectation building. Of course it was Tom. He was the veteran, the hero, the one they all knew. I lowered my eyes again. My hands still clasped, the hum in my chest, growing louder, sharper, like static before a strike. But the general didn't move toward Tom's table. His footsteps started again, slow, deliberate, cutting through the whispers like a blade. I heard them getting closer, the sound echoing in my ears, and I felt the room shift, the air tightening around me. I didn't look up. I couldn't. My breath caught my fingers digging into my palms, but I kept my face blank, my posture steady the way I'd been trained to in moments of impossible pressure. The footsteps stopped close now, too close, and I felt the weight of eyes, hundreds of them, turning toward my corner of the room. "Ma'am," General Holt said, his voice softer now, but carrying a reverence that made my heart stop. "We've been looking for you." I froze. The words didn't make sense, not at first. My mind scrambled, reaching for explanations, but there were none. I lifted my eyes, slow, reluctant, and there he was, standing just a few feet away, his gaze locked on me. General Raymond Holt, A man who'd once briefed presidents who'd shaped wars from shadows was looking at me. Not Tom, not Claire, not anyone else. Me, Olivia Smith, the spinster, the nobody. The room was silent, a silence so thick it pressed against my skin. I felt Claire's stare, Maddie's confusion, the pastor's hesitation, but I couldn't look away from Holt. His eyes held mine steady, knowing, and for a moment I was back in a bunker, my head set tight. My voice, the only thing standing between life and death. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but my throat was dry. My words locked behind years of silence. I shook my head, just a fraction, a reflex, as if I could push this away, make it not real. But Holt didn't move. He stood there, his presence a wall, his voice low but firm. "Olivia Smith," he said, and my name in his mouth was a shock, a weight I hadn't felt in years. "I need you to stand, ma'am, please." I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed to stay seated, to stay hidden, to let this moment pass and go back to being invisible. But his voice wasn't a request. It was a command, the kind I'd followed 1,000 times in rooms where hesitation wasn't an option. I pushed my chair back the scrape loud in the silence and stood, my hands trembling at my sides. The room was a blur, faces and lights melting together, but I felt their shock, their disbelief like a wave crashing over me. Claire's mouth was open, Maddie's eyes wide, Tom's shoulders stiff. They didn't understand. How could they? Holt stepped closer, his metals glinting, his face softening just enough to show something like respect, maybe even gratitude. "You don't know me," he said loud enough for the room to hear, "but I know you, and so do a lot of people who owe you their lives." His words hit me like a physical thing, each one landing on the stones in my chest, cracking them open. I shook my head again, smaller this time, my lips parting, but no sound coming out. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I was just Olivia, that this was a mistake, but I couldn't, because he wasn't wrong, and I'd known deep down that this day might come. The crowd was frozen, their whispers gone, their eyes locked on us. I felt Claire's stare burning into me, Maddie's confusion turning to something else, something I couldn't name. The pastor cleared his throat, uncertain, but Holt didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on me, and I saw it then, the recognition, the kind I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten it existed. He knew who I was. Not the spinster, not the nobody, but the woman who'd sat in bunkers, who'd made calls that saved lives, who'd carried the weight of those calls alone. "I'm sorry it took us so long to find you." Holt said, his voice quieter now, almost personal. "You made it hard. Kept yourself quiet, just like you were trained." There was a hint of a smile in his eyes, but it was heavy, weighted with something I couldn't place. "But we don't forget our own. Not ever." I didn't know what to say. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding so loud I was sure the room could hear it. I wanted to sit down, to disappear, to go back to my house and my silence, but I couldn't move. Holt's presence held me there, and so did the room, their silence. A question I wasn't ready to answer. I thought of a moment years ago in a control room, my screen showing a strike team under fire. I'd saved them, my voice, steady my hands, sure, and their commander had called me a miracle. I'd carried that moment, hidden it away, but now it felt close, too close, like a wound reopening. I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like to be found, to have your truth. Step into the light when you've spent years hiding it. If you've ever felt like you're nothing, like your story is buried, I need you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, join me on this channel, because this isn't the end. There's more to come, more to show you about what happens when the world finally sees you. Holt took another step, his hand reaching out not to touch me, but to gesture a small, respectful motion. "We need to talk, ma'am," he said, his voice low for me alone. "There's something you need to know." The room was still silent, still watching, and I felt the hum in my chest grow louder, sharper, like a signal I couldn't ignore. Something was happening and I couldn't stop it, not anymore. The church hall was a sea of silence. Every breath held every eye fixed on me. My name is Olivia Smith, and at 47 I'd spent a decade perfecting the art of being unseen. But now, standing in the dim glow of fluorescent lights, with General Raymond Holt's gaze pinning me in place, I felt exposed raw like a secret torn open. His words, "We've been looking for you," still hung in the air, heavy as smoke, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My hands trembled at my sides, my heart a drumbeat in my chest, and all I wanted was to sit down, to fade back into the shadows where I belonged. But the room wouldn't let me. The general wouldn't let me. Holt's eyes held mine, steady, unyielding the way a commander looks at someone they trust, with the impossible. He stood just a few feet away, his uniform sharp, his medals catching the light like stars. The crowd was frozen, their faces a blur of shock and confusion. Claire's mouth open, Maddie's eyes wide, Tom's shoulders rigid. I felt their stares sharp as needles, but I couldn't look away from Holt. He knew me. Not the Olivia they saw, the spinster, the nobody, but the woman I'd buried, the one who'd lived in bunkers, who'd carried lives in her hands. Olivia Jane Smith. He said, his voice clear, deliberate, cutting through the silence like a blade. Commander, United States Air Force, retired. Codename Sentinel. The words hit me like a shockwave, my full name and title spoken with a reverence that made my knees weak. Sentinel. I hadn't heard that name in 10 years, hadn't let myself think it. It was a ghost, a piece of me I'd locked away with oaths and silence. My lips parted, a reflex to deny it, to say he was mistaken, but no sound came. My throat was tight, my breath shallow, and I shook my head, a small, desperate motion. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not now. Holt didn't waver. He took a step closer, his voice softer but no less commanding, meant for the room, but aimed at me. "You were one of the best," he said. "A drone operations commander who saved more lives than most of us will ever know. You led strikes that turned the tide-guided teams out of hell, made calls no one else could. You were the voice in the dark, the one they trusted when there was no one else." His words were a weight, each one, landing on the stones in my chest, cracking them open until I could barely breathe. I wanted to stop him, to tell him to be quiet, to let me stay hidden. But I couldn't. His voice held me, and so did the room, their silence a cage I couldn't escape. I glanced at Claire just for a second and saw her face pale, her eyes wide, her hand frozen on Tom's arm. Maddie was staring, her phone forgotten, her mouth slightly open. Lauren leaned forward, her brow furrowed, as if she couldn't make sense of what she was hearing. The pastor stood at the podium, his hands clasped, his expression caught between awe and uncertainty. The whole room was a statue, every face turned to me, and I felt it, the shift, the moment when invisibility becomes something else, something heavier. "Please." I whispered, my voice barely audible, my eyes back on Holt. "You don't need to do this." It was all I could manage, a plea to let me stay small, to let me keep my silence. But Holt shook his head just enough to tell me he wouldn't stop. His eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm, carrying the weight of truth. "We do," he said, "because you never told them, because you carried it alone like you were trained to. But you're not alone anymore, Commander. Not tonight." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, then back to me. "There's a reason I'm here. A strike team from 09 Operation Nightfall. They're alive because of you, and they asked me to find you, to thank you, to make sure the world knows who you are. Operation Nightfall." The name was a knife cutting through the years, pulling me back to a night I'd never forgotten. I was 34 at the peak of my career, in a bunker lit only by screens, my headset tight against my ears. The strike team was pinned down in a desert, their position compromised, their radio, a mess of panic and static. "We're done," their leader had shouted, his voice breaking. "They're closing in." I'd been on the line for hours, my eyes burning, my hands steady despite the exhaustion. I'd found the enemy, a convoy armed and moving fast, hidden in a sandstorm. The satellite feed was grainy, the conditions impossible, but I saw it, the pattern, the moment. I called the strike, my voice calmed my heart, racing as the drone's feed showed the explosion, the threat gone. The team escaped, every single one of them, and their commander sent a message. Sentinel, you're a goddamn angel. I'd saved 23 lives that night, but I'd lost something too, a piece of myself left in the dust of that desert. I blinked the memory, fading the church hall, rushing back. My eyes were stinging, but I didn't let the tears fall. I never did. Holt was still looking at me, his face a mix of pride and sorrow, as if he knew what that night had cost me. You were the best of us, he said, quieter now, almost personal. And you never asked for anything. Not a medal, not a name, not even a thank you. But you're getting it now, whether you want it or not. The room was still silent, but it was different now. A silence of awe, of disbelief, of something I didn't have a name for. I felt Claire's stare hotter than before, and Maddie's softer, almost fragile. Tom's face was unreadable, his hands flat on the table. I wanted to look away, to shrink back into my chair, but I couldn't. Holt's words had stripped me bare, laid my truth out for everyone to see, and there was no hiding anymore. I'm not that person now, I said. My voice low, trembling, meant for him, but loud enough for the room to hear. I left that behind. I'm just Olivia. It was the truth, or part of it. I'd walked away from the bunkers, from the screens, from the weight of it all, because I couldn't carry it anymore. I'd chosen this life, this smallness, this silence, but Holt shook his head again, his eyes never leaving mine. You'll always be Sentinel, he said, and the word was a wound and a gift, tearing me open and holding me together. You don't get to leave that behind. It's in your bones, in every choice you made, every life you saved. And these people, he gestured to the room, his voice rising. They need to know who's been standing in their midst. The crowd stirred a soft rustle of movement, but no one spoke. I felt their eyes, their questions, their shock, and it was too much. I wanted to run, to push past Holt and out the door back to my house, where the world was quiet and small. But I didn't. I stood there, my hands still trembling, my heart still pounding, because that's what I'd been trained to do, stand even when everything was falling apart. I thought of nightfall again, of the team's voices in my headset, their relief when they realized they'd make it home. I thought of the medal in my drawer, the note from their commander, the weight of every call I'd made. I'd carried it alone for so long, but now it was here, in this room, and I didn't know how to hold it anymore. Holt took a step back, his hands at his sides, but his presence was still a force holding the room in place. We're not done, Commander, he said, his voice low for me alone. There's more, but for now, let them see you. He gestured to the crowd, and I felt it. The shift, the moment when silence becomes something else. Reverence, maybe, or regret. I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like to have your truth spoken, to stand in a room where you're finally seen. If you've ever hidden who you are, if you've ever carried a story, no one knows. I need you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, join me on this channel, because this isn't the end. There's more to come, more to show you about what happens when the world bows to your truth. The room was still watching, still silent, but it was changing the air alive with something new. I stood there, my hands at my sides, my heart exposed, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The church hall was no longer silent, but it wasn't loud either. It was something else, a hum, a pulse, like the air itself was alive with what had just happened. My name is Olivia Smith, and at 47, I'd spent years building walls around my truth, only to watch them crumble in a single moment. General Raymond Holt's words, Commander Codename Sentinel, still echoed in my ears, each syllable, a stone lifted from my chest, each one leaving me raw. I stood there, my hands trembling at my sides, the weight of the room's eyes pressing into me. They saw me now. Not the spinster, not the nobody, but me. and I didn't know how to carry it. Holt stood a few feet away, his presence, steady, his metals glinting under the fluorescent lights. He'd said his piece laid my past bare for all of Willow Creek to see, and now he waited, his eyes on me, soft but unyielding. The crowd was stirring chairs, creaking whispers starting to ripple, but it was different from before. The shock was fading, replaced by something heavier, reverence maybe, or the sharp edge of realization. I felt it in the way their gazes shifted, no longer dismissive, no longer pitying. I felt it in the way Claire's hand dropped from Tom's arm, her face pale, her eyes locked on me like she was seeing a stranger. I wanted to sit down, to shrink back into the shadows, but my legs wouldn't move. My heart was too loud, my breath too shallow, and the hum in my chest, the one I'd known in bunkers in moments of impossible choice, was still there, steady now, like a signal locking into place. I glanced at the table where I'd been sitting, my plate of cornbread and beans still there, untouched, a reminder of the woman I'd been just minutes ago. But that woman was gone, or maybe she'd never existed. Maybe I'd always been sentinel, even here in this small town, in this quiet life. The pastor cleared his throat, his hands fumbling at the podium, his voice hesitant but warm. Well, I think we owe Commander Smith our gratitude. He said the word commander, sounding foreign in his mouth like he was testing it. For her service, for all she's done. The room stirred again, and then slowly someone stood, a man near the front, older, his face weathered, his hands, clapping softly at first, then louder. Another followed, a woman in a red dress, her eyes bright with something like awe. Then another and another, until the whole room was on its feet, their applause building not loud like at the Gala, but steady, deliberate, a sound that wrapped around me like a tide. I didn't know what to do. My hands stayed at my sides, my eyes on the floor, the linoleum scuffed and familiar. I didn't want this. The clapping, the attention, the weight of their respect. I'd never asked for it, never needed it. I'd done what I did because it was my job, because lives depended on it, not because I wanted a room full of people to stand for me. But they stood anyway, and I felt it, the shift, the moment when invisibility becomes something else. Not pride, not triumph, but something quieter, something that hurt and healed at the same time. Holt stepped closer, his voice low, meant for me alone. "Take it, Olivia," he said, his eyes steady. "You earned it." I shook my head just a fraction. My lips pressed tight. I didn't want to earn this, not here, not like this. But he didn't move, didn't let me look away, and I saw it in his face, the same respect I'd seen from commanders, from soldiers, from men and women who knew what it meant to carry what I carried. I nodded barely, and he stepped back, his hands at his sides, giving me the room to stand in my truth. The applause slowed, then stopped, but the room didn't sit. They stayed standing, their eyes on me, and I felt the weight of it, the questions, the wonder, the regret. I saw it in Claire's face, her mouth still open, her eyes wet now, her hands clasped in front of her, like she was holding herself together. Maddie was staring, her phone forgotten, her face soft, almost fragile. Lauren's brow was furrowed, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Tom looked down, his hands flat on the table, his shoulders heavy. They didn't know what to do with me now, and I didn't know what to do with them. Then Claire moved. She stood her chair, scraping her dress, catching the light as she stepped away from the table. The room watched the air tightening again, and I felt my heart skip, my hands clenching at my sides. She walked toward me, her steps slow, her face a mix of shock and something else, guilt maybe, or shame. She stopped a few feet away, her hands twisting together, her eyes searching mine. "Liv?" she said, her voice breaking barely above a whisper. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." Her words were a knife, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the years of her dismissal, her scorn. I wanted to feel anger, to let the hurt spill out, to tell her how her words had piled up stone after stone until I could barely breathe. But I didn't. I looked at her, my sister, Her face crumpled, her pride stripped away, and I felt nothing but a quiet ache. "It's okay," I said, my voice low, steady, the way it had been in bunkers when the world was falling apart. "You didn't know. It was the truth, and it was enough." I didn't need her apology, didn't need her to understand. I'd carried this alone for so long I didn't know how to share it even now. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak again. She nodded a small, jerky motion and stepped back, her hands still twisting. The room was watching their silence thick, but I felt a shift in them, a softening. Maddie stood next her movements, hesitant, her face flushed. "Aunt Liv," she said, her voice small. "I didn't mean—" "I'm sorry." She stopped, her eyes dropping, and I saw it, the regret, the realization that she'd been wrong, that I'd been more than she'd ever imagined. I nodded, my lips curving just enough to ease her because she was young, because she didn't know better, because I'd never wanted her to carry this weight. The pastor spoke again, his voice stronger now, calling for a moment of recognition. "Let's honor Commander Smith," he said, and from somewhere in the crowd, a man stepped forward. A veteran, his jacket heavy with pins, his face serious. He raised his hand in a salute slow and deliberate, his eyes locked on mine. Another followed, then another, until a dozen men and women stood saluting their hands, steady their faces, a mix of pride and gratitude. I didn't know their stories, but I felt it, their respect, their understanding, the silent acknowledgement of what it meant to serve in the shadows. I didn't salute back. I couldn't. My hands stayed at my sides, my eyes stinging, but I stood straighter, my shoulders square the way I'd been trained. Holt watched, his face unreadable, but I saw the nod he gave, small, almost imperceptible, a gesture that said he understood. The salutes ended, the room still standing, and the pastor called for a prayer. His voice soft, now asking for strength for healing, for those who carry burdens unseen. I bowed my head. My eyes on the floor, the linoleum a blur, and I let the words wash over me, let the moment hold me. I thought of a night years ago after Operation Nightfall when I'd sat alone in my quarters, my hands shaking my headset on the table. I'd saved 23 lives that night, but I'd seen the cost, grainy images of the strike, the convoy gone, the lives I'd ended. I'd written a letter to myself, a promise to keep going, to carry it for them, for the ones who'd made it home. I'd kept that letter hidden with the metal, the note, the pieces of a life I'd left behind. Now in this room, that promise felt alive again, heavy, but not crushing a weight I could bear. The prayer ended and the room began to move. People sitting, voices starting to rise, but it was different now. They looked at me, some with smiles, some with nods, some with eyes that held questions they'd never ask. I stayed where I was, my hands at my sides, my heart still loud but steady. Claire returned to her table, her face wet, her arm around Maddie. Tom stood, his movement slow, and gave me a nod, his face serious, a soldier's respect. I nodded back, and it was enough. I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like to be seen, to have your truth held up for the world to witness. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever carried a story that hurts to hold, I need you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, join me on this channel, because this isn't the end. There's more to come, more to show you about what happens when silence becomes strength. The supper resumed, the room softer now, the air alive with something new. I stood there, my truth no longer hidden, and for the first time in years, I felt the stones in my chest lift just enough to let me breathe. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped out of the church hall, the gravel crunching under my shoes, the stars sharp above Willow Creek. My name is Olivia Smith, and at 47 I'd learned to carry my truth in silence, to let the world see what it wanted. But tonight, that silence had broken, and I wasn't sure what was left in its place. The supper was still going on behind me, voices and laughter spilling through the open doors, softer now touched, with something new. I didn't look back. My coat was draped over my arm, my pecan pie left on the table, and I walked toward home. My steps steady my heart quieter than it had been in years. The town was asleep, its streets empty, the glow of porch lights fading into the dark. I passed the market, its windows shuttered, and the library where I'd shelved books for a decade, my hands steady, even when my heart wasn't. I thought of the church hall of General Holt's voice, Commander Codename Sentinel, and the way the room had stood their applause a tide I hadn't expected. I thought of Claire's tears, Maddie's apology, the salutes from veterans who'd never known my name, but knew my weight. It was real, all of it, but it felt like a dream, something that belonged to someone else. My house came into view small and weathered its porch, light flickering like it always did. I climbed the steps, the wood creaking under my weight, and let myself in the door, sighing shut behind me. The air inside was familiar old wood coffee, the faint scent of lavender from a candle I hadn't lit in weeks. I hung my coat on the rack, my hands moving by habit, and stood in the living room, the quiet wrapping around me like a blanket. It was the same house I'd lived in for 10 years, the same creaking floors, the same scarred kitchen table, but it felt different now. I felt different. I walked to the bedroom, my steps slow, and opened the drawer where I kept the pieces of my past. There it was, the metal small and silver, its surface dull from years of neglect. Next to it, the note from the Nightfall Commander, its edges soft from handling, and the letter I'd written to myself, a promise to keep going. I picked up the metal, its weight heavier than I remembered, and held it in my palm, my thumb tracing the inscription, "For service beyond the call." I'd never shown it to anyone, never spoken of it, but now it was out my truth, laid bare, in a room full of people who'd called me nothing. I set the metal down and reached for something else, a small American flag folded tight, a gift from a colleague when I'd left the service. I hadn't looked at it in years, hadn't wanted to, but tonight I unfolded it, my hands careful, the fabric soft and worn. I smoothed it out on the bed, my fingers lingering on the stars, the stripes, the weight of what they meant. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The stones in my chest were gone or lighter now, and the hum I'd felt, the one from bunkers, from missions, from the church hall, was still there, but it was calm, like a signal fading into silence. I thought of the days that would come, the ones that would look like the days before. I'd go back to the library, shelving books, helping kids with their homework. I'd walk to the market, my basket heavy with apples and bread. I'd sit in the back at church, my hands folded, my smile small. Willow Creek wouldn't change, not really. People would talk their whispers different now, tinged with awe or curiosity instead of pity. Claire would call her voice hesitant, wanting to bridge the gap she'd built. Maddie might visit her apologies softer, her eyes searching for the aunt she'd never known. I'd listen, I'd nod, I'd be kind because that's who I was. But I wouldn't explain. I didn't need to. The town saw me now, or thought they did. They saw the commander, the hero, the woman who'd saved lives from a bunker thousands of miles away. But they didn't see the nights I'd woken, gasping my hands, reaching for controls that weren't there. They didn't see the faces in my dreams, the ones I'd saved, and the ones I hadn't. They didn't see the weight of silence, the way it had shaped me, made me small to keep me whole. And that was okay. They didn't need to see it all. The truth lived in me, in my spine, in the way I carried myself, even when no one was watching. I folded the flag again, my hands precise the way I'd been taught, each crease sharp, each motion deliberate. It was a small thing, a quiet thing, but it was mine. I placed it back in the drawer next to the metal, the note, the letter, and closed it, the wood scraping softly. I didn't need to look at them anymore. They were part of me, always would be, but they didn't define me. I was Olivia, yes, but I was also Sentinel, and I was something else, too. Something no one could name, and not even me. The next morning I woke early, the sky pale through my window, the air cool with the promise of fall. I made coffee black and sat at my kitchen table, the scars in the wood familiar under my fingers. The radio hummed some ad for a harvest festival, but I didn't listen. My mind was on the church hall, on the way the room had stood, on the way Holt's eyes had held mine. I thought of Claire, her face wet, her voice breaking, and Maddie, her apology, small but real. I thought of the salutes, the applause, the weight of being seen. It was over now, that moment, but it had changed something, not in them, but in me. I went to the library that day, my steps lighter, my smile easier. The kids were there, their books spread out, their voices loud with questions. I helped them, my hands steady my voice, calm the way it had been in bunkers and control rooms, in moments when the world depended on me. Mrs. Carter stopped by, her eyes bright, her words careful. "We're proud of you, Liv," she said, and I nodded, my smile small but real. I didn't need their pride, but I took it because it was kind, because it was theirs to give. Claire called that evening, her voice soft, hesitant. "Liv, can we talk?" she asked, and I said yes, because she was my sister, because I'd always said yes. She came over, her hands twisting, her eyes searching mine. I didn't know, she said again, and I nodded. My hands folded my silence enough. She talked about Tom, about Maddie, about the years we'd lost, and I listened because that's what I did. I didn't tell her about the bunkers, the strikes, the lives I'd carried. I didn't need to. She saw me now, or enough of me, and that was enough. Days turned to weeks, and Willow Creek settled back into itself, the whispers fading, the stares softening. I walked through the town, my head a little higher, my steps a little surer. I didn't seek their reverence, didn't want their awe, but I carried their respect, quiet and steady, like the flag I'd folded, like the medal in my drawer. I was still Olivia, still the woman who shelved books, who brought pies to suppers, who sat in the back. But I was more too, and I didn't need to prove it. It lived in me, in the way I moved, in the way I breathed. I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like to find peace, not in the world's eyes, but in your own. You don't need to explain your past to anyone. It lives in your spine, in the way you carry yourself, in the choices you make when no one's watching. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever carried a truth that burns, I need you to hear me. You are enough just as you are. Hit that subscribe button, join me on this channel because this is my story, but it's yours too. Keep going, keep carrying it, because you're stronger than you know. I stood on my porch that night, the air cool as stars, bright above Willow Creek. I looked out at the town, its light small but steady, and I felt it. The quiet, the grace, the peace I'd earned. I turned, opened my door and stepped inside, my head held high, my heart finally still. The door closed behind me, soft and sure, and I was home.